The reason that we're doing this tonight ultimately starts with one of my great old friends, Jack Mueller, who is a poet, a lifelong poet, who spent, I don't know, 20, 30 years in the San Francisco area, perhaps a little bit on and off, but mostly in the Bay Area, before he became a retired poet to the mountains of southwestern Colorado, where I met him on the Colorado poetry circuit. And Jack died in 2017. And Lithic Bookstore is here. And before there was Lithic Bookstore, there was Lithic Press, which I started largely because of Jack Mueller. I'd go down to his house in Ridgeway, and it was kind of an experience to be at his dining room table that was always full of piles of papers and thousands of 3x5 cards and bar napkins that he had drawn cartoons on. And, you know, I started making books with Jack, and one of the very first ones I made is this one, Amor Fati, one of the very first kind of perfect bound books that I did with Lithic Press. And then Jack died in 2017, and we had a memorial for him in San Francisco. And at the memorial, I met Bobby Yarra. And I think we talked for not 5 minutes, probably. And I got a really good feeling from Bobby, and we ended up staying in touch over the years. And several years ago, Bobby called me and said that he had a manuscript of the work of a really good friend of his, Ira Cohen, and he really wanted to make it into a book, and he needed some help. And after talking about it for a while, we decided to partner with each other. And Bobby has a press called the Golda Foundation, and he's made a number of books. And we ended up making this book, A Certain Kind of Wizard, Treasures from the Vault of Ira Cohen. And tonight is essentially this is the book release. So it's available right now. When I first got the manuscript, one of the first things I read in it was a story that Ira was telling about, and I get the facts mostly right. In 1958, he was born and raised in New York City. And in 1958, he got on a Yugoslavian freighter and headed across the Atlantic Ocean. And after a stop or two, got off in Tangiers and walked into the center of town in Tangiers and met some interesting people. And 5 years later, he left Tangiers and spent a couple of years in Europe and made his way back to New York City and walked around the city and was wondering what the hell he was doing back in New York. And so he went down to the docks and got back on a freighter and headed back over. And like I said, that's mostly true, probably. And this book is full of amazing stories. Ira seemed to, he spent a lot of time in New York, of course, in Tangiers, in Amsterdam, in Kathmandu, in various places in India. And it seemed like everywhere he would go, he would gather amazing people around him. Artists, poets, musicians, makers of various kinds. And I think Bobby had something to say about the history of the making of this book, or the making of this manuscript.
Before.
Well, so Ira, the manuscript that we made this book from, Ira and this editor, Jordan Zinovich, spent 4 months putting the manuscript together, because Ira was an extraordinary artist, but he hadn't had that many real books made. He had a bunch of chapbooks and other books, and they tried to sell or get this manuscript published without success. So Ira died, And about 3 years ago, someone sent me the manuscript, the raw manuscript. And Ira was a very good friend of mine, and I knew his poems, and I knew a lot of his photos, because he was, besides being a poet, he was a great photographer, he was a filmmaker, he knew so many of the great people of his time and interviewed them, and those Paul Bowles and Brian Geisen and Charles Henry Ford, and these interviews are in the book. And so someone sent me this manuscript, and what I hadn't known of Ira was his brilliant prose, because he's known as a poet-photographer. And when I read the prose, I thought, this is magnificent, and I have to make a book. And that's when I called Danny, just for some advice about how to, because I had made one book before this of this artist, or I published a book of this artist, Valley Myers, who was a great friend and also a great friend of Ira's. And so I wanted to publish this manuscript, and Danny said, well, I think I'd like to do that with you. And the manuscript, the process had a rocky start. I fired 3 editors in the way, and I lost 3 friendships, and I didn't fire them in an appropriate way, but it happened that way. And then finally, I found a great editor, Romy Ashby, who's a friend of mine for 30 years, and Ira Landgarden did the photos in the book, and so we made this beautiful book that Ira Cohen would have been very proud of, I know. And so that's the history of the book. And George and Agneta were friends of Ira's, and they're gonna go on.
Well, actually, can you hear me? So actually, I was, first of all, as you probably have noticed, we're all dressed in black. And the reason was also because Ira was always dressed in black. I threw in a little bit of pink just because. But I was actually going to introduce this little meeting, whatever you call it, is saying that, well, all day, more or less, we have been talking about Ira, so we almost felt we've said everything we wanted to say. And we got so, and thought, what are we going to say? How can we repeat all the lovely things we said today? But of course we can, because look how thick this book is. And Ira was not thick. He actually was far from thick. He was open and lovely and an amazing and undervalued artist. And he was somewhat unhappy about it, but at the same time, he seemed also, okay, so what? He wasn't pushy, he wasn't interested in money, he was interested in art and what he was doing. That's really what propelled him. And now I'm going to hand over to my dear friend here to my left, who has so many anecdotes about him. And you will probably think that this is because we will interrupt each other probably. Because we get carried away.
Stick with us.
So whatever we do, you will have to listen to. As simple as that.
It was the margaritas early in the night, and and we're all old friends here.
Yeah.
But we were also friends of this extraordinary guy. Yeah. So let me step back in time. There's a little time machine trip here. And for those younger people in the audience, it's going to be, you might
Younger
not get
people,
all the cultural references.
I don't think there are that many younger people in the audience.
No, I can see quite a few faces.
My generation.
I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
But for the older crowd, it was a different time. Ira Cohen went to India, but he went to India after Allen Ginsberg, right? So he went to Kathmandu. Allen went, was more in the south, and Allen came back, and it was the harmonium and the finger trembles, and and he's Hare Krishna, and it's all this crazy stuff, and in the country in America, it's like, what? We hadn't seen a poet like that before, and Ira had certain aspects of that which were similar, although he was a very different kind of guy. And I remember when my friend Neely Tchaikovsky, who also has a book here from Lithic Press, his collected works, it's a lovely book. When he first saw Ira, he said, "Oh, he's Allen Ginsberg on stilts," because Ira was 6'3" or 2" or something like that, but he was up there, and he was big, and he always wore black, and and silk. He was into the silk thing, and he always had a beautiful girlfriend in tow, and that's where I met him. I met him in Amsterdam for the first time at the One World Poetry Festival. I was there with Gregory Corso as part of the Beat Generation entourage, and Ira was introduced to me, and it was like, what the heck is this guy? And and he was, so he towered over everybody in the room, and that alone interested me. And at that time he was traveling with his girlfriend Caroline Josselin, a French woman who was an artist, and she was into this sort of paper mache and gauze and what's that? Plaster.
Yeah.
And she would make these things and put them on your face, and then it was like, what is that? I'd never seen anything like this before. And so what happened was Ira and she went around to all the poets at the festival, and they built up this this face of the famous poets. William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, Brian Geisen, on and on. And Ira photographed the whole thing. So you'd see different stages of the faces being created, life masks instead of death masks. And this attracted me. So I went with him to for these various experiences. And Ira, of course, the conversation between the artists and this guy, and I was like, I'm getting to know, I already knew all of the other guys, and Ira was new to me. And I was like absolutely fascinated by him. And over the years, we grew closer and closer. And Ira had this strange way about him. He liked to talk very fast, and it was, grabbing things out of the world. So it was, well, I don't know what you're like, but there were all these people there, and they were talking to me, and he was talking to them, and she was talking to me, and my mother called, and then that happened, and I didn't know what to do, and so I moved forward, and it would go on like that in a waterfall of language, and I stuck with it. And all of a sudden, there's a little glint comes out of his eye, because he's obviously, most people were like, what, and they were just rejecting it because they couldn't get him. But I got him. And that sort of solidified our friendship, because he needed and wanted to be understood. And then, and from that, his poetry opened up, the photography. He had done films in India. I ended up later on in my life going to India and living there for 6 years and producing a whole series of books. He had produced books in India as well, in Kathmandu. That was his thing. And then in years later, when I was living in San Francisco, he'd come by and visit. He would visit other luminaries in San Francisco. But he always, I was very honored that he always included me. Yeah. I'm small potatoes in this game. Yeah. But in case you don't know, my name is George Scrivani, right? And it's a story of nomen es omen, right? My name became who I was, right? Your name is fate. It's an old Roman adage, nomen es omen, right? So Scrivani is the scribe, and I became the scribe. I'm a translator. I translated from 4 languages. Well, 4 languages. I had a sort of knack for languages, rare for Americans, and
Excusez-moi.
And then I became an editor as well, and I edited all these books, blah, 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 and it was a lot of fun, and getting to know these really wonderful people. And Ira was one of them. Yeah. What did you want to say?
Excusez-moi.
Oh. Okay.
I like to interject, and the way we will do this, we will interrupt each other. Because
I'm begging for an interruption.
Ira would have loved that. I also realized that I left my glasses for the second time somewhere here, but that's another story.
While
I think
you're
it's
waiting
important.
for
I think it's important to know. I'm just going to fill in. We're going to jump around a little bit. Ira was born to two deaf-mute parents, which is really important, which also explains the way he expressed himself. I mean, in his house, his parents would have dinner parties with other deaf-mute people. So it will be totally silent, you can imagine. And so
Well,
he
he said that, excuse me, he said that it was more like the cooing of pigeons.
Yeah, yeah.
The talking among the deaf people.
Exactly. Because some of them were cooing like pigeons.
Yeah, that's the way Ira
Yeah.
would say that.
But you then can imagine that this little boy grew up to be enormously expressive. And apparently he talked with his hands, and his mother even watched him walking down the road while he was talking to people, but he was talking with his fingers as well, making language. But if you can you imagine be brought up by two deaf-mute parents? That's why he was so expressive. His face said everything. And now I leave it to Bobby, and I might slip off this little stage for a second to look for my second pair of glasses I lost tonight.
And Ira was a very mischievous guy with really twinkly eyes,
Oh, yeah.
incredibly handsome and charismatic, so that wherever he showed up, as Danny mentioned, he was either part of whatever creative circle there was, or he started it. And he lived for about 10 years in Kathmandu. He started a press there. He started a poetry series. Then he lived in Amsterdam. I was lucky enough to travel with him. We were in Amsterdam a couple of times together. Mostly he was reading there in an artist colony outside of Amsterdam, Rauwgoord, as well as he would read in London, and I accompanied him. And then when this lady died, who was a friend of both of us, I keep bringing her up, but Valerie Mars was an extraordinary Australian artist. And then we traveled together to Australia to, I threw her ashes off of a boat there. But and Ira always said to Valerie, we got to get married. We got to get married. And she said, fuck off, man. What do you mean get married? And he said, we'll have the most amazing wedding that anyone will ever have. So that was his reasons. But he was an extraordinary guy. I first saw him. I was a new lawyer in San Francisco, and I trudged home from the BART with my three-piece suit and my attaché case, and I passed this cafe on 24th Street, La Boheme, and there were these people in robes there, and I recognized Ira as the leader with coal under his eyes, and they were. And I was a lawyer. And I said, I wish I was with those people. And then a few years later, so Valley invited me to a party of George Plimpton was having in New York, and I had gotten so excited to see Valley because wherever she was, that's where I wanted to be. I got to New York and I scarfed down food, and then I got to her place at the Chelsea Hotel, and of course there was a lot of gin. And then she said, hey, baby, we're going to go to a party with George Plimpton. You're going to love him. We get to the party, and as I'm shaking hands with him, I know I'm going to be sick. So I rush out to the street, and I start barfing. And then I turn around, and there's the guy I recognize from the cafe, Ira Cohen, looking at me and saying, rough night, huh? Yeah. And that's how we became friends. And
I think I touched a little bit on how I met these guys. And as the moderator of this event, I'd like to introduce our panel here at this time. Aggie Falk is a poet, artist, organizer of many events in the Bay Area and elsewhere. She's part of a world poetry organization has just come back from a couple of months in Europe where she spends part of most years, it seems like, and as well as living, kind of being somewhat based in San Francisco after originally being from Sweden. George, Sweden and England, yeah. George Scrivani was great friends with my friend Jack Mueller, and I met George, who George was the beat poet Gregory Corso's uh, translator, secretary, great friend for the better part of 30 years. And he was kind of in the midst of all of the so-called beat poets. And we met in 2017 when Jack was dying, after George was living in San Francisco during the AIDS era and losing many friends. He decided to put himself back through school and became a nurse so that he could help not only his friends but many other people. And then he did the same with my friend Jack when he was dying. George came out a number of times here, and that's when I first met him in 17, as he was helping Jack to move on to the next place. And
one has to understand that this was preceded by years of conversation late at night with Jack. Jack would call me late at night in San Francisco, unaware of the hour difference, right? It didn't matter to him. He had something to say, and I wanted to hear it. And despite having to go to, I was on a 12-hour schedule at San Francisco General, where I worked as a nurse, taking care of, I was in the trauma section, so it was all the heavy stuff. And it was the Circus Maximus, but I always found time to talk hours with Jack. Yeah. Jack was an extraordinary friend that I had known many years previously. And he ran a poetry series in San Francisco. I got to meet lots of people through him. He was, he was a very unique guy, a warm, human person in a world where humanity seems to be evaporating.
A warm human person with massive intelligence. He just could
smart, very
talk
smart
about anything. And I think he probably considered himself a sailor, perhaps more than anything.
He was a great sailor. He would take a bunch of drunken poets out onto the San Francisco Bay and somehow keep them in line. At the end of one of the trips,
Don't fall off the boat.
One of the ladies, a great friend of mine, Rosemary Mano, threw his shoes off of the boat. He wasn't very happy, but he was a great sailor.
Yeah.
He certainly was, and a thief as well. He stole from me an Amtrak whistle.
So
I could never prove it, but it in good hands, yes.
Now, just as we've been talking, you guys get the feeling that these three folks, as well as the people that Ira and other people that we're talking about, one of the great characteristics of them is they were just remarkable travelers. And George touched on it a little bit, and I just want to read a bit of Ira from when he was in India. This is from the chapter called The Hardwar. Am I pronouncing that right? Hardwar.
Hardwar, yeah.
Hardwar Journal, the festival of the Kumbh Mela. And we'll, anyway, now I sit on the banks of Ganga, my feet in the river. As I begin this notebook, everyone has different information about the Mela, but it seems that the main Kumbh begins in Ujjain on March 31, that here in Hardwar, the Ard Kumbh, or half Kumbh, will be celebrated on April 13th, the main bathing day with millions expected. The Kumbh Mela occurs every 12 years in 4 different places: Hardwar, Allahabad, Ujjain, and Nashik. But there are annual pilgrimages to each of these sacred sites, a full 12-year meeting occurring at 3-year intervals among 4 places. I can hardly lift my arm after the cholera shot administered to all people entering Hardwar area, free, or at any rate covered by a 3 rupee tax. We meet David on the Ghat. He is Scottish, has spent many seasons in Goa and Manali, now living as a sadhu, or holy man. He holds his hands together, palm against palm, as he salutes the sun before dunking his head 3 times in the river. As he says, Hardwar is the gate to heaven. We have the first chillum with him, then go to smoke with 2 babas sitting down by the river. And I know I asked George the other day if he had ever been to the Kumbh Mela, and one of the things that the way Ira described being at this festival of sadhus who, correct me, are holy men who have basically denied all human.
Yeah, they've withdrawn from the
worldly.
world,
Yeah.
and and are devoted totally to the spiritual plane. And they may appear to us to be a little unusual.
Yeah.
There was one, that Ira himself promoted, known as Dick Baba, because he would hang stones from his penis, and that was, they were forms of ascesis, ascetic behavior. India is filled with these people. They're everywhere. So I was living in the south of India. This is happening in the north, right? I didn't get to the Kumbh Mela. I planned on doing that, but my stint in India ended in 1992, and and I passed the next opportunity to do it. But these babas are all over the place, and India is a very unique and wonderful place. If you want to connect with the the extreme origins of who we are as humans, because India doesn't deny anything. It's all up front. All the horror of what it means to be human and all the glory of it. It's all there in front of you every day, and it's filled with poetry. It's a unique civilization in our society. So again, I'm studying classical, Latin and Greek at the university, and I'm studying it like a Westerner. And then I go to India, and all of a sudden the pieces fall into place. Now I get to understand why you can't wear this cloth in the temple, why you must do this, the ritual behaviors are demanded. These are ancient movements of who we are, and nothing has changed since then. We're still doing this. We just don't know it.
And
this is the world we live in.
and it's all on YouTube. One of the incredible films Ira made was at the Kumbh Mela called
Oh yeah, it's a great
Kings
film.
on Straw Mats.
Kings with straw mats.
Kings with Straw Mats. And it's mind-blowing. And not only are the scenes mind-blowing, but to think about what Ira did to, it looked like it was hard to be there. It's intense to be there. And all of these, George talked about the guys that would hang weights off their dicks. And
It's just
there would
one
be
of the many
contests. There would
things.
be lots of guys all around the place.
Standing with their hand up, for 20 years without taking it down.
Right. And their fingernails grow long and into their skin. And they're just crazy.
At this point, I would like to bring it back to Ira. Because Ira actually recorded this throughout his life. Not only this, but he was also an extraordinary photographer. Extraordinary. And actually, in all justice, I don't think he got the recognition in his lifetime that he deserved. I've said that before.
Which is why we're doing
and
this.
so why? Look, how wonderful to actually have it all in this book. Because he really was an extraordinary person. And though very talkative and full of himself, as he should be, because he had so much to part with and give, he was an extraordinarily talented is not the right word actually, gifted Is that the right word? Maybe not even that. He was an extraordinary person. I personally was so entertained being in his company, just looking at those funny eyes. And he talked, of course, a mile a minute, but with such humor and such insight, and there was so much bonhomie and love of life, which I think sprung much from being brought up by two deaf mute parents. I mean, what an extraordinary start in life.
And when I first met his mother, the first experience was Ira and his deaf mother dancing around the living room, and they loved each other so much. It was when she see Ira, she would light up, and so would he. It was glorious to watch. And Ira lived in an apartment filled with books, and it was in a madhouse. But if you move something, no, don't move it. I know where it is. It's on top of 73 other books, you know. He was always good company, and although he spoke nonstop, he was always interesting. And the words would take him. It was like a labyrinth. You start here, but then it's here. But it was always. You could put the phone down for 20 minutes and come back, and Ira's still talking.
True.
Here's some of the photos that Aggie was talking about. This is the book of Ira Cohen's Mylar
The
Chamber
Mylar
photos.
yeah.
Were you ever in the? Did you see the Mylar Chamber?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
I
Can
was
you
there for
describe
them.
that? What?
They were. It's
Where
pieces
was
of
it?
Mylar that he would just bend and then take the photograph of. There were, you know, it was an experimental thing that he did, but they produced these extraordinary images. He was, exploring like everybody at that time. Everybody at that time was exploring. Every one of us was exploring. You remember that? You know, it was a really, a great period in time, just like now. Just like now. Although there are some things out there that look dark at the moment, don't let it get you down. Human spirit will reign supreme, and I'm certain of that.
Hey, George, where was the Mylar Chamber? Was it in his apartment? Was it in a studio?
He had a loft on Jefferson Street in New York City, which was a happening place, and he would make these extraordinary photos. Jimi Hendrix came up there, and he photographed Jimi Hendrix, and Hendrix said, looking at your photos is like looking through butterflies' wings. So
That is.
Anyway, let me introduce another aspect of Ira Cohen's life. He did something, he had this grandiose idea of what he called the Akashic Record, which is not his term. It is a theosophical term about the etheric levels, the higher levels, those things beyond us, where all of our feelings, all of our thoughts, all of our actions, not only us, but all sentient beings get recorded. And he felt that he was part of that. His poetry, his photographs, the movies that he made. He was a multi-talented guy, and it was all part of what he called the Akashic Record. And I got to play a little part in that as the scribe, right? So he had this story by a guy named Gustav Meyrink, a German artist and creator from the turn of the 20th to the 19th to the 20th century, who wrote a famous book called The Golem. And he also did a lot of other stories. And there was this one story called Petroleum, Petroleum. And Ira came to me one day and said, I want you to translate this, knowing that I was proficient in German. And I thought, well, great. This is a commission, oh my, this is something exciting. Somebody's actually asking me to do something for him. And I sat down and knocked out this translation of this funny little story. It's an apocalyptic story about people down in Mexico discovering oil, and they open the seam in the earth, and the oil is way more than they thought it was, and it covers the entire Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, and the entire world is destroyed. It's a funny little story, but he printed it under his label, the Akashic Record. And so, and I was like, what is he thinking? Ira was a mystery to me. I'm just this guy who has a proficiency in languages and editorial techniques, but I'm not a poet. These poets are extraordinary people. If you get to know one, you are lucky. Believe me, to hear the voice of a poet is to hear the sound of all of us, all through time at once. It is a great phenomenon, and I am blessed to have had that experience and to have had it from several people. Get out there. Look at people, join them, enjoy them, and don't listen to the bullshit they're selling on the news. Especially these days. Sorry, it's a plug.
That's good. I think that's a good plug.
Thank you.
Plug on. Yeah.
Take over.
So Ira could talk to anybody, and Ira could make you pose. He could, if he wanted to photograph you, he'd turn on the charm, and he'd say, people would melt because he had that gift of gab, and then he would photograph them in whichever way.
So I have that
wanted.
experience. Ira convinced me to do this totally outrageous kind of, I'm one of those guys who's subjective, easily manipulated, put it that way, especially if it's a warm human thing. Yeah. And Ira was that kind of guy, and he got me to dress up in a drag that was pretty over the top. And I had never done anything like that before. And there was Ira, and he was just, saying, "Oh, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that?" All of a sudden, I've got these same headdress on, and and I'm nearly naked. And he did a series of photographs, and I was thinking, well, that's something new in my life.
Ira loved props.
Embarrassed, I might say, but at the same time, what the hell,
He loved to put props on people, so he has everyone dressing up or in wigs or in hats, and he loved hats himself. He was a mysterious-looking guy. He could wear a cape, And I'm going to read a poem that he wrote of Valley Myers, and it's Poem for Valley, and he also, just an aside, he said the saddest thing that ever happened to him, he had done a photo shoot of Valley Myers, the best of his life, and he left it in a New York taxi. But anyway, so this is Poem for Valley. Perhaps the Armenian carving elephants on a human hair between heartbeats can tell you better why you were born at midday during a storm, or what the Moroccan is thinking in the asylum. She had a Moroccan boyfriend in the asylum who bit off someone's ear. Perhaps he can tell you why the best sailors can't swim, or how to freeze two perfect tears on the Chinese face. Perhaps the fox holding an egg in her mouth can tell you better how red conquered the rain, or how the blue line curves around the nipple. And I am sure that the hound knows better the meaning of the maidenhair fern, or the secrets of lavender under pillows. But only the harpooned whale can tell you as he turns, rising to the sun, how much he hates your blue-green eyes, how much a whale's heart weighs when it is finally undone.
And I'm going to come with another poem which is in a completely different direction, because he was a man of many conscience, and this is called The Time of the Werewolf. Remember Yugoslavia. Yes, remember Yugoslavia. How can we forget it? Now that we know what little we knew, which is too much for the human heart to contain. Again, man's brutality to man, ethnic cleansing, the rape of Bosnia, and the children, always the children. Once proud partisans filled the mountain stronghold with good reason to resist the Nazi avalanche. Then, too, the Serbs and the Croats, like the Hindus and the Muslims in India, turned each other over to the blood lists to history, Yugoslavia. What does it mean? A yoking of slaves to pull a nation plow. What it a kind of utopian dream of fellowship? I think of Fortress Europe, the Archduke Ferdinand, the ghost of the machine unleashed for death. The flame flickers in the black volcano of Germany, and the dead come and sing every night. Through steel walls you can hear them. Sarajevo, the trigger point, the excuse of the Anschluss, because it is the end of history. They incorporate in themselves the nostalgia, the melange of word, image, and iconoclasm, the full-blown flower of genetic hate, endemic, psychic, etc. Yet, even now, the room is full of Yugoslavians who are not infected with this madness. Why not kill your neighbor over a cow? Why not kill last year's wedding guests, school friends, former lovers? Bomb is flat, grass is over. Put the cows out. A non-solution for an insoluble situation. 10,000 people are dying daily in Angola. I can't even speak about Cambodia, Mozambique, Burma, and the Sudan, Somalia, Florida, El Salvador, the Bronx, Iraq, Ireland, the Chinese medical program in Tibet, automatic sterilization of young girls. These are just the physical things. On to the metaphysical, the failure of those in power to do anything, the lack of will. Is this the end of history? The end of Joycean cycle? All we have left for the American psyche with this empty circle is Oldenburg's tilted bottle of empty words. Remember Joseph Boyce' coyote pissing on the Wall Street Journal. Can you hear the famous whimper? This is a non-howl. The final stormtroopers of our psyche, in the eyes of humanity, the look of someone who has been tied to a chair by a convicted killer turned loose. Deutschmark über alles. The artist, like a dog, howls before the earthquake, which took down the walls from Tangier to Trieste, from the old nest to the Orly airport. Economic, political power is only another extension of war. Give them beer and football, as the Romans gave them bread and circuses. The only great artist that has not been created yet. There is a man whose job is to burn old money. 2 million pounds in one day. He keeps the ashes in the ice bags and takes them home to line the walls, to be the richest man in the world. James says, you have to cremate yourself and join the ice bags of burnt money on the shelf. I quote Anatole Stern's Europe 1927. Eternity and nothingness. Two fattened boxers who will always win. We who wolf down meat every day. We who breathe sulfur like air. We who drag along the streets our powerless fists, stuffing our pockets. We shall lose, lose, lose. As always. I can hardly pronounce this word. Insurrectionaries, arise. My God, what a fantastic poem. Wow. This is the first time I've read it. I think it's just so absolutely, wow. Don't you agree? Can you get a better poem for?
Well, let me interject here for a
Wow.
moment. The little tiny aspect of it. He has the guy at the beginning of the poem
Yeah.
killing over a cow, right? So the uniqueness of the poet is not only that they tell us who we are and where we are, but it echoes through time. That story is cattle rustling. That story is America, cattle rustling in America. That is also repeated in the Zendavestas in the Persian literature from 2, 3, 4,000 years ago. It's in the Rig Veda, the stealing of cattle, 5,000 years ago. I mean, come on, folks. This is who we are, and this is who the poets show us. And Ira was one of the guys who could do it. And all I can do is exhort us all to engage with poetry, because poetry is the closest you're ever going to get to truth.
And there's a number of interviews in this book. Ira interviewing people interviewing Ira. And this one is the poet, photographer, archivist, Gerard Malanga. And this is a chapter called There's a Poem That Remembers It. Ira Cohen talks with Gerard Malanga. Here's Malanga asking Ira Cohen, where does poetry come from? I knew you were going to ask me questions like that, especially early in the day. Where does poetry come from? Yes, where does poetry come from for you? Well, it's very hard to answer a general question like that and be glib about it. It comes from a deep place, or other times it can come from surface textures overlapping sounds and thoughts. Usually it comes from feelings. If there isn't a basic feeling underlying the poem, it doesn't work for me. I think that's really the key. Can one induce poetry? I think it's a hunt and stalk situation to some degree. I believe there is a special situation that yields poetry, but it has to be inspired? Yes. You can say you write poetry when you're in pain or when you're in love, or you write poetry when you're sitting at a certain cafe in solitude, or when other people are around to inspire you. When the conversation is interesting, sometimes it can be an ordinary conversation, but you're in the mood. It can be like receiving things over your radio, like in Cocteau's Orpheus. So you start talking and you start taking angelic dictation in a sense. It often feels like that, and you become a medium. So if you write it down, there's a poem that remembers it. It can be terrific if it's a good poem. Other times, you do it just hoping that you're going to get to that place. It's a struggle. You have to hunt. I once read in a book about the Kalahari Bushmen by Lawrence Vanderpost. Can you imagine living your whole life wandering as nomads, led only by flashes of lightning? Thinking about this, I wrote in my notebook the other day, wherever lightning flashes, water is sure to be found. I guess you can say the same thing about poetry, and it goes on and on.
Good.
I'll read a poem. It's from the Moroccan Journal, 1987. My heart feels like an uncut diamond. And it's he spent so much time in Morocco. He lived there for quite a while, and he published there also. My heart feels like an uncut diamond, though it is still the same, it is not the same. Someone speaks of a bridge to be built from Tangier to Algeciras, or is it Gibraltar? Yes, and then a highway to the stars, or more likely an elevator to the underworld, says Yellow Turban to White Jalaba, as the exhaust fumes from the bus engulf them, leaving behind not even a single shadow. Is that Mel Clay in a white jacket turning the corner? No, it is a figment of my imagination escaped from the asylum. Is that Ian Somerville walking backwards up the street as if pulled by a giant magnet? No, that is William Burroughs making electricity from dead cats. Is that Tatiana glistening on Maxitone? No, that is the sun dancing in the sugar bowl. Is that Mark Schleifer wavering on the cliff edge? No, it is a promontory in the wind of time, about to fall into the sea. Is that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony being played up the street? No, it is the sound of the bread wagons rumbling over cobblestones. Is that George Andrews with two girls in hand looking for bread? No, it is an unidentified flying object about to land. Is that One-Eyed Mose hanging by his heels? No, that is the hangman inventing the tarot. Are the dead really so fascinated by lovemaking? Yes, that is how they travel. Is that Irving in short pants looking for trouble? No, that's me, unable to stop thinking. Is that Kenneth Howell looking for Joe Orton? Is that Jane Bowes looking for Sharifa, Rosalind looking for her baby, Alfred searching for his lost hair? Is that the wig of it all, the patched robe of my brain, the wind talking to itself? Brian is dead and Yakubi is dead, and I am a not unhappy ghost remembering everything, the warp and woof of memories, her yellow slip, her shaved cunt, her idiot child. Dream shuttle makes me exist everywhere at once. The blind beggars led by children keep coming. They all have many houses in the Kasbah, chant the unbelievers, sucking on sugar. Words keep coming back, like Bezezo for tits, Lichin for oranges, like Mina, like Fatima, like Drisa Barada, dropping his trousers for an injection in the middle of his shop. The trunk is full of old sepia postcards, bare-breasted girls smoking hookahs, etc. We speak of the cataplana, the mist which obscures even the cielo. You cannot even see the hand in front of your face. We embrace, he says he thought of me only yesterday. He says there are always 9 such men who look like us in the world, and that we are the 10th. We speak of the gold fillets in the sky over Mulan Absalom. The garbage men in rubber boots go through the Zoko, pushing wheeled drums of collected garbage. An unveiled woman wobbles out of a taxi and heads home before sunrise. Paul couldn't believe there was a Karma Street, but I will never forget it. And Billy Batman, who made the best hash in the world, he dropped a loaded pistol in Kabul, shot himself in the balls, took some heroin and lay down to die. Now I must get up from my table in the all-night Café Central. No more Dr. Nadal, no more windows with red crosses and red crescents. The water thrown from buckets runs across the cafe floors and over the sidewalks as I drop a dirham into the hand of a blind beggar singing in the dark on the American stairs. From Nin's A Spy in the House of Love. The women wear fireflies in their hair, but the fireflies stop shining when they go to sleep. So now and then the women had to rub the fireflies to keep them awake. Anyway, that's Ira Cohen's Moroccan Journal.
Hey, I was just wondering, do you remember the last times that you were spending with Ira? Like, where were you? What was going on?
Unfortunately, yes.
Ah,
So Ira came out to San Francisco, where he had lived earlier on for many, actually quite a few years. And he always looked me up, which was a great compliment. And he was suffering. He was dying. He was sick. He was diabetic. He was living out the final stages of diabetes, and he was not happy. And it was unfortunately painful for me to witness this. And it was repeated with our dear friend Neely Sharkovsky, who also died from the effects of diabetes. All I can tell you, folks, is don't go down that path. Stay away from sugar, stay away from too much food. Do not eat bad stuff, which is what they're selling us, and they're doing it with malicious intent.
Stay away
healthy.
from high fructose corn syrup.
I also
Yeah,
I
stay
have
away
a
from it
diabetic
all.
story too. I have a diabetic story about him too, and you're right. But we were in New York with Jack Hirschman, who is my late husband, poet, etc. And we were in New York and visiting Ira, and he had in his inner pocket of his coat a big sea bass he was cooking us. He always cooked sea bass if he could find it. However, suddenly Jack, who was also a diabetic, said, Ira, can I test you? He had his little diabetic kit. And I can't remember the figure, but it was way up. And Jack saying, my God, this is out of control. And it really was. And I can't remember the figure. Those of you who know about this would know the figure. However, Jack, and actually I had also learned from a university in Italy that if you drink vodka, and it's
This was
true,
funny.
it's actually, it's true. It lowers blood sugar levels, so Jack plied him with vodka, and lo and behold, down it went.
I actually tested this.
Yeah.
Because I didn't believe it when Jack told me at first. And I went and did the test, and it's true.
It
Vodka
is true.
vodka doesn't do what
So
the
now
other
you know,
alcohols
if you're
do.
diabetic in here, if your blood sugar level goes up,
Don't drink.
And the thing with Ira too.
But if you must,
The thing
Pick
with
vodka.
Ira, he's diabetic, and he'd be eating a piece of cake with such like mischievous look, like, look at me, I'm a bad boy. And I'd say, Ira, this is wrong. This is, but he was that way. I was with him the day before he died. He was in a coma. Several days before, he had been in hospital, and they were going to put him in a rehabilitation place, and I was in the ambulance with him going to the rehabilitation place with his girlfriend, Mickey Maher, when they took his temperature, and it was terrible. So they turned around, brought him back to the hospital. He had gotten an infection in the hospital, and then he went into a coma, and he didn't recover. Anyway, it was a sad ending, but his life was so extraordinary, and he made it to 76, somehow living that difficult life of, he was always broke, Ira. He never played the game. A friend, John Sode, had started an Ira Cohen Photo of the Month Club to get his friends to each send $100 a month to get a photo of Ira Cohen. And I was a long-standing member of that club, but and even when he had little money, he was always very generous. He would give it away.
Yes.
He would help his friends any way he could.
yeah, he was one of the guys who made something out of nothing.
absolutely.
You know,
I
and that
totally-
is the miracle that the poet,
Yeah.
and as far as I know, the
Yeah.
poet and the
Yeah.
artists are the only people who can
Yeah.
do that,
Yeah.
to make something out of nothing.
Yeah. No.
And, they say, von nichts kommt nichts. From nothing comes
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
But it's not true. in
But,
this
yeah.
cases, these people, these rare individuals in our world are, and they're in our world.
Yes.
We just have to open up and see them.
Yeah.
They could be the
Yeah.
guy next to you.
Yeah.
It's not that rare,
No.
but the message is there from the ancient days.
Yeah.
These are the same people
Yeah.
who guided us
Yeah.
from the caves out into the plains. They're no different. They have led us and are leading us to a future that we can embrace only if we want to.
Yeah. I'd like to chime in there. Absolutely continue the thread because that was so true. This was this enormously talented human being who produced so much that he left behind, and he really, really wasn't very good on the economic journey because that didn't matter so much to him. He just couldn't make that bet. And obviously, but wow, what an enormously brilliant output.
We ignore our poets,
Yeah.
but
and paint,
but
yeah.
100 years from now, who are they going to be reading? The poets.
Yeah. Is that how we end this?
Well, I think it's a good way to end
I
it. Yeah,
think
and I
so.
think with this book had a long and winding road, shall we say, to get made, and kind of along with what Aggie and George were just saying, it's every book that we make, it feels it's a sacred thing, and thank you.
And we have to say this. This is a strange phenomenon. I mean, Ira Cohen was never in Fruita, but Danny has done this extraordinary thing. Out of this little town of Fruita, he was able to make a real, whatever anybody says, it is an enormous impact on the literature of America.
Absolutely.
The books that this guy has been able to publish, they not only are they beautiful to look at, but they are the message that we all need to hear if we could only wake up and recognize that although we don't know we need it, we do.
I raise in Fruita. I raise in Fruita.
WTF, baby.
And he'd be very proud to be here.
Yes, he would.
Yeah, thank you, Aggie and George and Bobby, for traveling from far to help make this happen. And thank you all for being here.